As we navigate the pandemic waters, the staffing landscape has skewed a bit. Some might say that potential staff are more available than ever, but are they willing to work at camp? And are their parents willing to allow them to work at camp? And how has the proposition of working at camp changed? We have tremendous benefits over almost every other summer job, and our challenge continues to be figuring out how to translate the camp experience into a language that neophytes can understand and appreciate. This is the Day Camp Pod. Welcome back, my friends, to the Day Camp Podcast. I'm Andy Pritikin, Director of Liberty Lake in the Philly suburbs of New Jersey.
I'm Sam Thompson from Crystal Lake Park District, Crystal Lake, Illinois.
I am Tiffany McDuffie, founder of Purposeful Play, both in Chicago and Milwaukee, Wisconsin.
And we are Day Camp pros dedicated to the professional development of our colleagues, discussing topics and best practices that can improve our organizations and ourselves. Today, we are joined by Kim Aycock and Jolley Corley, two ladies who spend a lot of time focusing on the ins and outs of staff retention and recruitment. Kim, with her work as a camp consultant and trainer and the leader of the ACA Committee for Recruitment and Retention, and Jolley, who not only preaches it, but practices at her own camp. Welcome, ladies, to the Day Camp Pod.
Thanks for having us.
Oh, we're so excited. So, we always talk about when I'm at I used to run Tri-State Camp Conference for a while, and we would joke around as we'd walk around the hallways during the sessions that you could always tell when it was a staff session, because those are the ones where the people were actually in the hallways outside looking in, trying to get a seat kind of thing. This is the big topic for everybody. It's like the insurmountable dream, right? It's like you could never get it right. We can only keep chipping away at it. So I was mentioning before we got on that the big question that I am hit up with all the time now, given the moment of time that we're in, is for the camps that didn't run in 2020. They're pretty nervous about getting their people back for 2021. And I was just curious what your thoughts were on that.
Go ahead, Kim.
Sure. Well, I was actually on a call yesterday with the MAIC, and there was 80 people on the call, and the Midwest Association of Independent Camps. And that was the topic that kept coming back. It kept circling back, and we talk about something else. And then it was like ping pong back and forth with, staff. So the thing that Jolley and I have noticed is that there's that panicky feeling. You can feel that there's this just angst, and people are sort of throwing their hands up in the air, and they're almost to the point where like they're stuck and they're not really sure what to do. And so they're questioning themselves, they're questioning any practices that they've ever done, or things, what do I do? Where do I start? And so we have some thoughts on that to hopefully help people feel a little bit better and not to sort of go to that panic mode, because that really doesn't usually help us. It kind of prevents us from moving forward and keeping our eyes on that camp culture, which we believe is tied. It is your staff culture. They're one and the same. And so this is a huge thing, because getting our staff on board, they set the tone and model what we want our camp culture to be, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I look at it as an opportunity to strengthen your camp culture, right?
Absolutely.
Where you had these staff that saw themselves as stakeholders, but saw themselves sort of as a peripheral stakeholder. And now, like, is your opportunity to really rope them in, like, we're in this together, baby. As a camp that ran in 2020, it was obvious that was a big thing. And I don't see why it wouldn't be that way in 2021, especially for the staff who are yearning so badly to get back to it. I had a lot of a staff last year that worked for me that had previously worked at other camps, but they worked for me because I was running this summer. And in the beginning of September, literally right after Labor Day, a bunch of them reached out for me from different camps. And they were like, I need to know if I'm invited back next year, because I've already been invited back to my camp that didn't run in 2020. And I was like, holy mackerel. I was like, yeah, I guess so. I hate being pressured, but I guess you're invited back, But then I thought about it, and I was like, wow, that's actually a really good idea, is getting on top of it, like, really quickly.
I think so. And, I want to kind of go back a little bit to what you said about Tri-States, and how for years, and I remember the very first time I went to a professional camp conference was Tri-States. It was still when it was in Midtown. It was a long time ago. And that was exactly what I noticed too, even that and following it. But I think we as a camp industry have that in the back of our minds, right? That we have to convince people to work at camp. And so that's always been there. And so now that we're up against this pandemic, this like global challenge, we almost are resting back on that. Like, we've worked so hard, Real Jobs, the Real Jobs Project with ACA, we've worked so hard that this kind of feels like a bump. And I think part of that is that as much as we know it in our heads why camp is good for staff, we haven't always translated that as well as we should on the ground. We translate it really well during interviews, even during our staff training. I think the little bump is, and that's where I think what you said, that this could really be good for us, is that if we can really get good at translating that in action, meaning when they're at camp. And so this year is a great year to think about how we put all of that into action to create the camp culture that Kim and I are talking about. And it's not just staff culture, because whatever their culture is, I'll guarantee that becomes your camp culture. As much as we don't want to admit maybe that's true, that is really what happens. And so taking kind of what you said, Andy, Kim and I really agree that this is a great time to start, whether you did it last year or whether this is going to be your first year, like opening up camp during this pandemic. It's a great year to start some of those things that have seemed challenging in the past.
I agree. And I also think that this, the situation that we're in, it just lends itself to summer camp, to working a summer camp. I mean, if you put yourself in a position of a 16 to 23-year-old, what you could do this summer, I mean, gosh, camp just seems like the best job proposition you could possibly do,
Yeah.
outside, being social, face to face with kids, in the middle of the summer when we had, 700 kids a day and 250 staff. I mean, it was a community of people, and we were interacting, even though there was masks and all these rules and hand washing and all that kind of stuff. We were interacting like it was relatively normal for the most part. And we would say to ourselves, wow, like the whole rest of the world is like bonkers right now. And we're in this like utopia of camp, and, even though, yes, we're getting this great news about vaccines and all this kind of things, there's still going to be all these fears, and it's still going to be a changed world this coming summer season. And so camp in many ways still seems like the antidote to what everybody's being deprived of right now.
That isolation, right? Yeah. And having to do everything via Zoom, and exactly that socialization.
Andy, how you started off with the fact that it was a group effort to get through last summer. I think, in the past, we've told staff what to do and they felt like they were on the fringes, but really this year and next summer as well will depend on them so much more completely. And I think they felt that, and I think it did make them better staff and more invested in camp, because it was all up to them. If they messed up, it messed up a lot of people. So yeah, they're totally more invested now.
That's a really good point, that their impact is much more visible, and it's a domino effect, more so than my group showed up late to swim, right? That has a little bit of a domino effect, but not the same as like, okay, now you've just made everyone late else like are going to have to be 5 minutes less than their activity. That doesn't seem as a big a deal, does it? Then like we had to shut down all of camp for the rest of the summer, or a whole cabin is quarantined now for 14 days, whatever it is, a whole group can't come back. So that's really true, Sam.
Right. I see somebody typed in the show notes here, when nothing is certain, everything is possible. But Margaret Drabble, that's a great quote. That's what I'm talking about. Like, this is opportunity that we have right now. And Kim has been trying now, part of this project, for how many years now, just how do we translate camp to the people that don't understand camp?
Well, and I think this year, like, you're right, you've hit the nail on the head, Andy, because not only are the kids, our campers, been isolated, but our staff have been isolated too. And so they feel the same sorts of things. They feel that being deprived of what they normally have, what's been sort of their normal, world for however long. And so pulling them together in that sort of mission, we're on a mission. We are on a mission to sort of conquer this, isolation, to conquer this. We've been trapped in this virtual world for so long. And one of the things that we looked at, we actually heard a podcast, and I put it in the show notes. It's from Building a Story Brand. Stephen Mansfield was the guest person on the podcast, but he's an author, and he wrote all about Winston Churchill. And so one of the things that's really fascinating about Winston Churchill is that he was known for leading in times of crisis. So he was at his best when there was, things were what kind of hit the fan, whether it was a world war or some sort of economic downturn or whatever. And so one of the things that we learned from his leadership is that he really knew how to frame whatever crisis it was so that he could get others on board. So others would be willing to act and they'd be willing to commit. And really, when you think about it, that's what we want our staff to do. We want to frame this coming summer, frame 2021 in a way that we can get our staff to buy in and commit to whatever this looks like, whatever protocols we have to follow, whatever, distancing we have to do, all those kinds of things. And so it's just really interesting that some people come alive during a crisis. And so just sort of rallying our group and saying, all right, this is our mission. And I think so many people I've heard from camps across the country that the staff who did get to work last summer, it really, really embraced that. Like they took that on and felt good about what they were able to accomplish.
Yeah, I think it's a great time for a camp to have a real mission if they don't, because like you said, that could be like that beacon out there that you're following. Because I agree with you, Kim. And we always get back to this. This is like Kim's third time on the podcast. And we always get back to this point where we're saying, it's the same thing. Staffing, it's the same thing as the kids. It's the same thing as the family. It's all one big culture. Like, we always get back to that. And an important thing here, if you didn't run last summer, we've been saying this the whole season now, is don't get stuck in the weeds of the details. It's not important. Okay. What's important is that your families and your staff know that you're going to open next summer and you're figuring it out along the way, and you're in or you're not. You know what I mean? If you're in, then you're part of that process of we're going to all figure it out together. And I talked to a lot of folks who didn't run last summer, and they do get stuck on that because, I think camp people are detailed people generally, and they feel nervous about moving forward without that exact game plan book, and I just want to say that I've been there. I fought the war last summer, and you can have that detailed book, as long as it's ready to go, before camp starts, you're going to be fine. That if people trust you and you have a mission, and I think that is a big point, which direction you're going down that road, that people are going to want to go along for this ride, right? Families are going to want to go for it for the kids' mental health and to be outside and playing with kids, and staff are going to want to do it for the same reasons, right? My teaching staff, the teachers were so upset and crying and sad on the last day of camp because they knew they were going back to screens. They were worse than the kids in being upset this past summer. So everybody's going to be yearning for that personal, interaction again.
Yeah, I think everything you guys are talking about in terms of culture is really huge in this whole conversation. I always tell people, like camp people, because I always say I'm an accidental camp director. I'm really just a business person by trade. And when we approach camp, there's a number of things we do. Like Andy just talked about, looking for that perfect book. Like perfectionism is something that we do because when you're dealing with the lives of little people, you want to make sure that you get it right. But I think just being very transparent that we're figuring it out as we go. We are also human, but we're looking to help bring back normalcy in this crazy situation is so very important. When you think of like a corporate structure, even whether it's Google or McDonald's, whomever it is, you guys are absolutely right. In our case, the counselors, but in their case, their employees are what create the company culture. You can't have a good customer experience without a good employee experience. And so I think that recognizing that our staff really are our most valuable assets, and especially with the age group that we target, that 16 to 23, they are looking for a way to make an impact. They want their work to matter more than I think some of the past generations who were just like looking for a job or looking for this. So, this is a call to arms where they can come in and do really, really impactful work. And I know my staff, we also ran the summer, and my staff had to be reconditioned because we're so used to having like that good time and just like those family type of bonds. So they would be like taking pictures with no mask, and I'd be like, we're good, everyone's gonna die. Like I would just be the most morbid, you know, I'm like, that's really fun that we were all very happy before everyone died. Not only don't send or post any more of those pictures, don't take any more of those pictures, and this is why. And so I think that like just like reconditioning that their mindset to say, you know, they knew then this is more than a job. We have to be really creative with how we have fun and still keep the conditions safe. Made it so much more. I mean, and me being super dramatic, they're just like, you know, every time someone tried to hug, everyone's gonna, okay, so we're not gonna do that.
But Tiff, we only had like 4 months of conditioning prior to that, right? Now they're going to have 16 months of
Absolutely.
it. You know, I think in many ways, I don't want to use the word easy at all, but I'm going to say it's going to be easier
Absolutely.
this summer because people are being conditioned. It's
Absolutely.
becoming more normal, unfortunately.
I think even for the camps that did run, that we set like the blueprint that it can be done. And I think we even set that expectation for, you know, there's some private schools, even in my local area, where the public schools are closed, but the private schools are running camps, and people who are even running e-learning right now are setting the blueprint to show that it can be done safely. And those people are more emotionally well because they're not having so many of the traumatic effects of just, you know, the isolation and all of that comes along with, you know, being safe in a pandemic. We are, you know, we're distanced, but we're together.
You know, Tiff just moved back to Chicago, and it reminds me of the Blues Brothers thing. Like, you know, Kim said, we're on a mission. Like, that's what we're like. Like, put the sunglasses on. We're on a mission, you know, to get this going. There's no doubt about it. And, you know, you mentioned transparency, Tiff, and Jolley and Kim were talking about communication. And that goes back to that, you know, the correlation between your camp families and your staff, you know, communicating with them. I think that a lot of camp professionals have been used to communicating with a veneer of professionality, you know, and like, you know, whatever it is where you're like, you know, like you're being communicated by any business kind of thing. And like, we're camp people, we're people. Lose that veneer and just be transparent and communicate the truth, right? And don't be over promising and stuff, and just be real, because that's what people want right now. And I think that your staff will find they'll be relieved to hear that, you know, to understand that your fears are their fears as well.
I think that's exactly it. And I think being able to be transparent, and we were talking, Kimmel, to talk a little bit more about this, like, and you, those of you who open probably saw this, that just being together, going back to some of the kind of just old school, if you call it that, like camp activities actually are great. Like, you don't have to do the bells and whistles because the bells and whistles are just being together face to face right now. Exactly. And so that's like the bells and whistles. But I think that transparency is so important, both with staff and with kids, and or with families, with the kids' families. And I think saying what you don't know is okay. We heard this over and over. Kim and I were part of a conversation with university students who some had worked at camp and some had had their camps not open. And so they were talking about the communication. And one of them said, I've never heard, we don't know that so many times. Like, we don't know yet. We don't know. And I think some of the things that we do know, and because we're trying to focus on staff here, you know, today, I think some of the things that, you know, because they do want to know, are you going to open? And if you can say, look, we're going to open, we don't know necessarily what you're going to teach right now. But what we do know is we need you to help kids to create a community that's going to help keep kids safe physically, you know, emotionally, mentally, which is what we do all the time. But now in the pandemic, that's like your number one job, right? It's always your number one job. But a lot of times we're focused on, you're going to, you know, teach arts and crafts, or you're going to be with 5-year-olds. That's kind of what we're saying. And again, that's where that idea of your mission and action, because that's not, if you look at your mission, it's not like teaching 5-year-olds arts and crafts is the mission. But so often when we're talking both to parents and to our staff, that's what we're talking about. Even though we know all the other stuff, and we assume they'll pick that up, and we may be better about that, talking about that in interviews. And again, like I said, in orientation and training, but the actual, what we're putting into action, I think a lot of times is focused on those really specifics, what we're teaching, rather than we're creating this community. And what we want that to be. And that's something we do know, as you know, Tiffany and Andy have mentioned. when you open, you knew you were going to do that. You may not have known the specifics until the day before you open. And I think people are used to that now. Now that they'll have 16 months, they're used to the school changing on a dime, the local restaurant who was doing carry out, not doing carry out. Now they're doing it. Now they're seating. I mean, everyone's used to that now. And I think kids are especially resilient. And when I'm talking kids, I mean campers all the way up to our staff, through 25 years old. They're way more resilient than the camp directors and the parents.
Right. They're way resilient, but the next thing you put in your little bullet list here, you wrote, be a stress detective, which I think is awesome use of words. So they're resilient, but they do get stressed. There's no doubt about it.
Yeah. Well, and actually in this particular case, we do want people to be stress detectives about the staff, but in this case, what we're talking about is ourselves.
Oh, really?
And what we stress about and you said it, you, Andy, said, camp directors are detail people. So we're stressing about those things. And that's exactly what happens is we start this spinning. And I think that happened to so many camp directors last year. And it's happening again, right? We just start saying, okay, if we can't hug each other, we can't do this, we can't do that. And we just start this distress. And so
right.
it's
right.
And then it's like, I can't do it.
Well, you heard all these camps that a lot of camps that didn't open could have opened, but we're like, well, it's not going to be like camp whatever if we open kind of thing, It's like,
Totally.
yeah, you're darn right it's not gonna. But if your mission is improving the lives of children, it's still going to be great.
I think this is so important, especially what Jolley just said about the like how we just go into this spiral where we just like get into this hole and we just like go all the things that could go, like you just keep going down that space and you have to just like practice thought stopping. Nope. Okay, now what can I do? And I really think that you said something about not focusing on what we don't know, but focusing on the things that we do know as a way to reassure staff, reassure ourselves, and I think like Andy has said, if we focus back on our mission, I run a sports camp, but nobody cares, and I always say this in my athletic directors, I drive them crazy because I'm like, nobody cares if you make it to the league. And then I would say, if you're a jerk, nobody cares if you make it to the league, if you, don't have empathy or don't have problem solving skills or can't overcome adversity or can't be resilient or, can't be your own personal stress detector or what have you. We exist to create all of those soft skills that are not taught in schools, but that they need in order to get through life. And what this pandemic has shown everybody is that it's not just the kids that need it. It's the, it's the counselors that need it. It's the directors that need it. It's the directors. Like there's no level of people that have not been affected by this thing. And we all need to work on our social, emotional health and our skills. And that is what is the real job of camp, no matter how you dress it up. If it's a sports camp or a STEM camp or whatever the parents' buzzwords were, their buzzwords are now just like normalcy, making it through. And the parents need a break at this point. So I think that's important.
Yeah. And one of the things that helps reduce a modicum of the stress levels for camp directors is having a good insurance company. All right. So this is a transition. AM Skyer is one of our proud sponsors. One of the leading insurance brokers of the finest camps in America for over 100 years, a strategic partner with summer camps, ready to support any needs arising from PR, legal, health, facility, and more. This past summer, not only did we have a pandemic, but we had tropical storms ripping through camp and took down a whole lot of the camps in the Northeast tents if we were a tent camp. So here we are at Liberty Lake. We're like, yay, isn't this great? We're an outdoor camp during a pandemic. Woo! And then the tropical storm goes by, starts knocking down all the camps. So thank you, AM Skyer, for jumping on it and getting us replacements in 24 hours. And that was really, really great. So experience the AM Skyer, or just check it out, amskyer.com. All right, back to the show. So the next thing we have here on our little list is returning to your values before current and ideal. And I think that goes back to a lot of what we've been touching on about getting back to the basics, right? And I think people are looking for that.
Well, and it's also getting back to your core and thinking about, if you really we like to do a little exercise with people where we have you think like, what are those things that are, if you think about that mission that you have or that vision, what are the things that are true to that, maybe in the past? Was it before the pandemic? What does that look like now? And we just think, even if you can come up with 3 words to describe, past, current, and then what if you look at your ideal culture? What does that look like? Like, again, where are we focusing? Where are we looking towards? And if we, Jolley can attest to the fact that if you turn around and kind of look behind you sometimes at what always was, and you wish it was this way, but it just can't be. So my dear friend Jolley was on a mountain biking excursion, and she was doing a switchback. And we've talked about how you have to, in mountain biking or horseback, you have to look forward. You have to know where you're headed. And just for a quick second, she turned her head to look behind, to give some words of encouragement to somebody behind her.
No.
Lo and behold, she crashes, and she crashes hard, and she broke her arm. This is like the first week that she's not having her right arm in a cast. Yes. And so she's starting to get movement back in her fingers. And so I think we lose those things that are so core to our mission and so important. We kind of throw our hands up and just sort of like, they goes out the window, because we become panicky, we become hopeless. We just don't know where to turn. And so you can always return to your core values to keep you, it's that anchor that you drop that keeps you from steering too far one direction or the other, right? It keeps you focused where you're headed. And I know, Jolley, you probably have something to say too, because you're always,
this is you.
This is
what I love. But I also think in these moments when we're anchored like that and we have those values truly, it's also a test, right? So when camp's going really great, it's hard to say whether or not you're actually doing, it's just going so well. The growth is minimal. Growth is painful. Growth is hard. And so it's in these moments, in these crisis moments, where you can really see whether or not, how strong you are, what's your foundation, and where potentially you need to do some growth. So I think that's another opportunity. Andy talked about opportunity. Not only is it opportunity for us to, find staff and, get them on this core mission and to really think about that, but it's also a great opportunity to see how strong our mission really is and where is the growth, rather than like, oh, we're really weak in this area. It's like, okay, here's the opportunity, here's the growth opportunity that we have and the direction that we need to really consider. And I think it's kind of that, that fight or flight, right? Or just freezing. So you either are panicking and you're kind of butting up against it because you're like, no, we've got this. And yet you're not willing to kind of look at what needs to change or those opportunities, or you just freeze. And I think that's kind of what we were talking about, Tiffany, when I was saying this, is like, you're just going this and you're just freeze. Yeah. You're just frozen in this circle.
No, you got to keep the momentum rolling forward.
Yeah. Or you just fly off. You're just like, I'm out of here. Like I'm done. I don't want to deal with this. And I think that's where having that anchor is so important. And it also tests how strong is the rope that ties us to that anchor. This is the time to test that out.
Right.
I think as a director too, with the situation going on, my perspective on my staff has changed. So now, before I was creating camp totally for the kids, and now I'm like, how can I take care of my staff? I run a year-round program, so now it's like, how do I bring them in? How do I keep them off unemployment? How do I keep, because they're providing this service, so it's not only just focused on the kids anymore. Now I'm trying to take care of them. So
I have a good yes and for the whole get back to the basics thing, which is, I've been hearing this quote being peddled around a lot in the last couple of weeks, which is that the pandemic didn't really, it didn't set us back 5 years. In many ways, what it did is sort of put us ahead 5 years. And it was amazing to me. Brandy, who's my like co-director here at Liberty Lake, I went, she's right now working in the nurse's office while schooling, her kid over Zoom, with the classroom, the Google Classroom and all that kind of thing. And I go in there and I watch this kindergarten class being done through Google Classroom, right? With these like 15 little kids and the teacher holding it together, and it just blows me away. It's amazing to me. And I'm thinking, man, like there's probably a lot of things that we could be doing with staff and staff training and just staff stuff in total, and recruitment also, that we didn't never really thought of, because, you know, camp is such an old school thing, and we like doing this old school. We like doing things face to face because it's old school, and we're old school and old school. Well, guess what? It's 2021 coming, right? And people have all these tools at our fingertips now. Like, we need to utilize them. You know, we need to do all the things that we can to get to people and tell our story, right? Because I think we have a compelling story.
Yeah, I agree. I think, and when you talk about the 15 kids and the teachers, just literally being able, and the word pivot is so overused right now, but it's true. Like, they were able to pivot, and my kids are 8 and 11, and they have like syllabus. You know, they have like, they know what they're going to be doing for the week, and so they're basically like college things that we didn't know until we, you know, were leaving. We were deep into high school or getting ready to go to college. Like, my son's like, oh mom, yes, and I have to do this at this time and this at this time. I have a break right now, and I'm just like, wow, both the teachers and the kids have been really been able to pivot and be extremely resilient in the midst of this. I do have a question, and I don't know if I'm going a bit off key, but I'm opening a new camp in Chicago, and so I have like all of these processes in place that I do, you know, that have been tested and tried with my Wisconsin staff. But do you ladies have any suggestions for someone who may be opening a new camp in this terrain? I think that it is quite different to bring back old staff, but I also think that, you know, across the nation, there's never been enough camps to service the children that have a need. And I think that there is opportunity for people who are just looking to get into this space. Actually, our last podcast was about people who were looking to start camps. So do you have suggestions for people who are just starting camps to find staff?
Well, I mean, one thing that's, you know, that we're noticing is that just internships in general for across the board are still not happening, or not happening in a very minimal capacity. And so what better way to, you know, offer that experience? So really finding out and putting yourself out there as a camp who's willing to work with someone as a new staff person to find out what it is, what their goals are, what leadership development track are they looking to, and then how can we offer those same things. And we can offer just about anything that anyone would throw out at us, you know, and it can easily turn into an internship, whether it's an official internship that's been sort of sanctioned with credit and all of that through a university or college or program, or if it's kind of an unofficial, but hey, we're getting all this experience. And so I don't think we can lose sight of that. And also travel like adventures are not happening, right? And so this is an opportunity to get your adventure, but you don't have to go so far, but you're working with all kinds of people that you normally wouldn't get to work with. So the sort of diversity comes to you instead of you having to go seek it out.
I think this particular generation, and this has been true in other generations, but this one coming back around is that whole idea of entrepreneurship. And I don't think we think of the idea of camp as being like that, but it really is, especially if you have a new camp that you're just opening up, that they can be a part of like an upstart, but in a different way. It's not a tech. And there's plenty of people who are not into tech, but would love to be part of something that's an upstart, you know, just starting brand new. You're setting the foundation, you're helping to set up traditions, all sorts of things. I think that's how I would sell it. I mean, I think, and I know that that's appealing to so many. There was a great article about how this particular generation, Gen Z, has one of the strongest kind of entrepreneurial spirits since the silent generation, which was also a big entrepreneurial generation. And I think that could be so appealing. And that kind of leads into the podcast that we listened to that we were talking about with Churchill that Kim mentioned earlier in our discussion. And I think it can go in that if you're framing this idea to them that you're part of something that's not been done. I mean, it's been done, you know, other places, but not this one. And you're framing that and kind of invoking this like destiny of what they're going to be a part of. How cool is that?
I really do love that. And I do think it is like saying, you know, this is our response to what's happening. That is a great a way to frame it. And I think that I agree. I think that there is a huge entrepreneurial spirit right now. And I think, again, I always go back to corporate stuff, but corporations look for people who have an entrepreneur spirit. They don't want someone that's just coming to work. They want someone who's coming to work and have ownership. And so camp is, a great space for like having that. We all of our counselors, our coaches, whatever you call them, take a lot of ownership and pride in the work that we deliver, all the time. So I think that this space is ripe for people to grab entrepreneurial experiences. So yeah, I love those answers. Thank you.
Well, and
Yeah,
I
get in
think
the ground floor. I like that.
I was also going to say Churchill, one of his quotes that we love is never let a good crisis go to waste. So, and so there's so many ways that we can take this, and Andy, I think again, going back to that opportunity, right? There's so many opportunities, and opportunities that we never would have probably had we not been faced with something as big as this that's affecting our entire world. So,
Right. I mean, pause a second also, and just again, pretend you're 20 years old and what the landscape is of your potential summer jobs and the kind of things you could be doing and what those things look like in a pandemic, if they're even going to happen at all. Right. And it's just the summer camp proposition is it's just so wonderful compared to all those on everything. And not just if you want to be a school teacher when you grow up, but just for like Jolley was saying, like an entrepreneur, like leadership skills. It's leadership skills, and so you're not one of those people that locks up in a crisis. You're someone that jumps to it, and gets your hands dirty, what with it. Just not too dirty. Wash them afterwards.
You got to make sure you're sanitizing those. I think that's absolutely, and I think if you look at this summer, and those of you who opened last summer know some of this, but I think communication is it's always been key with the families, but that's a great place that you might need more communication than normal. And so it's a great place to hire some amazing staff who are communication majors, who are into some technology, who do, any of the social media platforms, that you can get some really great internships. And if you're job sharing that a little bit, so you hire 2 or 3 people who can do that different times of the day, but also can be a counselor, with the 3-year-olds or the whatever, different groups, you can start to tie in things, and you can start to explain to them why also you want them to be with kids. I always talk to, kids are brutally honest. So I always talk to our staff about, you're going to work with clients, and wherever if you're going into marketing, you're going to whatever you're going to do. Because I agree with you, Andy. I think that the whole idea that only people who want to be teachers should go into camping is a falsehood. I guess if you want to work at a boarding school where you're, with kids 24/7, or if you're at day camp for so long, right? Like, okay, maybe. But I think there's so many other things. I always talk about that they're like clients. Kids are brutally, you plan this great activity, arts and crafts, and they're like, ugh, why? I don't like this. This is dumb. And so one of the ways we always talk to staff about that is like, you could assert your authority of like, these kids are being rude, they're this or that. And I say, let's not look at it like that. Let's work on our communication and persuasion skills. And so think about a client who's paying you money for the architecture that you just designed, whatever it is, engineering. They're not going to be like, oh yeah, great, I'll pay you the money for that, even though I hate that. They're going to say, no, not what I was thinking. And so by this experience and working with those kids and saying, what were you thinking when you came to arts and crafts you would do today? You're obviously really disappointed in this project that we did. What were you thinking you were going to do? And you can do that with kids super young, right? Like that's not something you just talking with teenagers, but what then they begin to do is use that skill and say, okay, when I go in for that interview and they say, tell us about a disappointment, say, I'm ready, to present to the clients, because I know what it's like to hear feedback that's harsh, and I can think on my feet and I can ask questions that's going to get to the point of what this client wants, because I worked with kids and kids are brutally honest and they told me exactly what they thought. And I talk about that all the time with our staff, that is why, you want to be better at communicating with kids, because you're going to be better than, dealing with other issues. Yeah. Or you want to be a supervisor. Everyone has temper tantrums, right? Kids might fall on the ground screaming and crying. Adults do the silent treatment, the rolling of the eyes, the like,
okay. Write a bad Yelp review.
Yeah, exactly. So how do you deal with that? So instead of looking at, I'm the authority figure and you guys should just listen to me, that's why we're doing this activity, or that's why we're playing this game. No, it's stopping, having communication, having a conversation about that. That's the skill. And so I think, those are all the things that we want to focus on.
Yeah. If you could manage a group of third graders, you could pretty much do anything.
Yeah.
I was a business major in college, and I remember taking like these management courses, and I thought they were a joke because I had worked at camp, and I was like, you kidding me? This theoretical BS. Like, try to get a group of kids, to do something you want to do when it's raining, then that shows you something. So I have one more thing I want to bounce off you ladies. So here's Tiff starting this camp in Chicago, right? And now she's soliciting for staff, right? So she's got these interested high school and college kids and who have never gone to camp themselves, right? So now they fill out this application and they slate an interview, and then they tell their parents, and their parents are like, wait, you're going to work at a summer camp? We're still coming out of a pandemic, What kind of advice do you have for camp directors in how to communicate either through the kids or directly to the parents this proposition of, because they're stepping into the unknown, right? For these families, it's like a black hole. Like they've seen the Bill Murray movies and Ernest Goes to Camp and Friday the 13th. And that is really that's their camp education at this point. Shout out to Sam's camp, by the way, is Crystal Lake. So yeah, what's your thoughts on that?
Well, I mean, one of the things that comes to mind is how, and this kind of goes back to listening to, so we had some time with some students from Clemson University, and one of the things that really caught our attention is they spoke about how important it is for the camp director to connect the dots for them about what it is that they're getting, what this is going to look like, where they, what are the skills they're going to be learning. And so not to wait until August, until after they've been at camp and you're like, oh, here's this cool little handout that shows you how to translate your skills on a resume, blah, blah, blah. But let's talk to them about it up front. So all those things that Jolley was saying, so that they have that sort of fodder to go back to their parents with. And I will put a plug in for Project Real Job here, because we do have a handout that has 10 things about why, and you can take this to your parents and show them why it is that working at camp is a great job. But we also learned from them, which I thought was really interesting about the connecting the dots, is that they want the dots connected not just for this summer, but they want to see potentially where the dots can be connected if they came back for a second summer or a third summer. So sometimes I think we focus so much on that first summer, but what about, ideally, wouldn't we like to have them for 2-3 years or more? Because it's easier to hire staff that have been with you before than to start with those brand new faces. And so this is one way I think to do that, is to really, really connect the dots.
I think, and when you're saying the idea of wanting them to be there even longer, one of the other things is having that laid out. And I was thinking about Tiffany with your new camp, you could really lay this out, and any camp can do this. It's just that when when it's all fresh, you're like, oh, this will just be part of what we do. And that is the idea of like, your first year, here's the experience you'll get. And if you want to develop more skills, here's what we're going to do your second year. So like at my camp, basically what I have laid out for their experience is a leadership development program. So when they're a counselor, they're basically in a leadership development training program. And so orientation is based off of that. And we're moving forward. And when we heard one of these students say that, not only did they want to know, they wanted us, to connect the dots, not because they're lazy, but they don't have that experience. They don't know what, just like Andy was saying, Friday, they have movies and meatballs and whatever, that's all they have. Not that they're being lazy, but they don't know that. So connecting the dots, but also then laying out, what would it look like if you were at camp for 3 years? So your final year, what would you have that you didn't have your first year? And how do you build off it? They really wanted to know that they could build off of it. Not like I'm getting the same experience all 3 years. And I think that's interesting. And that's one of the things that we do. And that has been the success of getting staff back year after year after year, especially when we're talking about this 16 to 25, which makes it a little challenging for them to come back year after year. But I like that idea of just, here's the first year experience, here's the second year. And it's up to them to take that, but here's what we can offer you and how you're going to grow into that. I love that. I think that's
Well, and they even use the
Exciting.
words growth zone. Remember that? And
Mhm.
we were like, oh, that's it. Growth.
Yeah.
zone. What is, so they want to know what their growth zone is going to look like. And so,
No,
yeah.
I think that's brilliant. And even I think if you are presenting it to parents, to universities, to any body that hosts, a bunch of young people who might be looking for work, if like you said, just positioning it as a leadership development program and this whole idea of a growth zone like that, those are just like, everybody's into buzzwords and hashtags. So like those are both, like buzzwords and hashtags and but they're not only that, right? And there is meat and potatoes, and that is stuff that was always there. And so I think not only for people starting a camp, but the pandemic has done a bunch of crazy things, but it has also given us all an excuse, a place from which to say reset, like we're going to change things and shake things up. So even for very much existing camps, we can, reposition that and say, okay, this year when staff come back, this is the opportunity, and this is going to be, leadership development, much like we do our teens, leaders in training. The same thing for our true staff. And, this is how we determine what happens here. And then maybe even that positions us from, I know you guys were saying earlier, we're thinking like, we have to do this kind of like begging things to get and convince people to come. Maybe that's a way to really reposition, is like, this is why you should be here, and this is what's offered here. You could just have any summer job, but here there's a growth zone and there's a leadership development opportunity, and that can help you. These examples were great, that Andy was given about the kids, like very true. And like the kids being brutally honest, and feedback is the breakfast of champions. If you can't take it from some kids, you definitely won't be able to take it elsewhere, so I love this entire conversation.
And if your staff culture is such that it's cool, it is the thing to do to be here multiple years. And that we have a huge 3rd-year ceremony with jackets. And so when they start off, they see that ceremony, and, the people that have the jackets are the ones who you go to for answers, and then it builds on itself.
Yeah, I think this sort of takes us back to the beginning. We were talking about retention, in that last year, going into the pandemic, and even through the pandemic, we had our best return rate of staff than I've had maybe ever. And this year, sending out the invites, pretty much everybody wants to come back, right? And you think about these kids that are going to this hybrid model of high school and whatever, and the kids in college that either they're doing it from home in their bedroom, or they're at their college stuck in their dorm by themselves. Like, it's just awful. So I mean, look what they have to look forward to coming to camp. I mean, this is way more real than anything else in their life right now, except for sitting home with their family, which has to feel more like house arrest than anything else, at this point. So, so yeah, wonderful opportunity for us to, we're doing what we've always been doing, but now, like, all of a sudden we're super relevant to the people that, we're barely on their, on their wavelength, and we're in the periphery of their brain zone. Like, now all of a sudden that camp proposition, now that sounds like something that's good, right?
Well, and I think we can also help staff see sort of what define victory and success. What does that look like? And so think about how cool it would be, like, get them to think about, okay, 5, 10, 15 years, you're at your camp reunion. Remember back to summer 2020, or remember back to summer 2021 when we had to do all this, blah, 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 blah. And we did it. And we, it was hard and it was challenging, but we rose to the occasion and we sort of conquered, this is really, and this is, again, going back to Churchill, this is our generation's greatest challenge. And what better way to sort of invoke that, their destiny is, we're going to conquer this, we're going to get through this, and we're going to make things better. And it's going to, for when we get to the other side.
Yeah.
So,
take your head out of the sand and come out here and play with us.
Take your mask off. Eventually we can do that, right? So.
All right. Before we get to our tip of the week, I want to give a shout out to Commercial Recreation Specialists, CRS 4rec.com. All right. Fine purveyors of the greatest waterfront stuff. You know, they got it all at Liberty Lake. Just speaking of me, I got my Zoom flume and I got my water trampoline. We've got boats, we've got playgrounds, and we've got a pool slide. You know, they really do it up, and they are serious about fun, and they're big supporters at all the ACA events. So CRS, thank you for being a sponsor of the Day Camp Pod. So for my tip of the week, you know, I was on a webinar with my good friends at Wake, my West Coast buddies now, the cool kids of camp, as I call them. And it was a day camp group, and they were talking about, they were like, this guy, most of those camps didn't run last summer. They couldn't. They just weren't legally able to. And one of the guys was saying, you know, well, my day camp culture is so steeped in like doing things together as a group. Like we all go out and we all do this and we all do that. And they come back to camp and we do this and we're jumping at each other, we're hugging each other. He's like, what am I going to do? Like, how am I going to supplant that? You know, it's a great question. And I don't have a clear-cut answer for that, but you should really start thinking about that now. There's no doubt about it, because there's no doubt. You know, it was funny. Kim and Jolley came on late because I'm convinced I gave Kim the wrong time, and so I had a lot of time talking with Sam and Tiffany. And when we can sit here and talk and like actually build trust within one another, like that's what it's all about when you're building a team. And you can't do that at your camp if everybody comes in with a mask and is only talking to the kids in their group, and at the end of the day all leave and go home. Like that's not going to work. So you have to figure out ways to in the evenings or on the weekends to have time. And if you need big spread out areas to do that for social distancing, then you got to do it at camp. And I know it stinks doing things at camp. Sometimes you want to do things off of camp when you're a day camp, but you've got to find the time and budget for it. I give my unit leaders $50 each towards going out. You know, and even if that means they're buying takeout food and going to some backyard or coming back to camp and sitting in a circle, socially distanced, you got to make the time to do that. It's super important. One of the things that we've done traditionally, and we didn't do it last year because it was the middle of the pandemic, is during the first week of camp, we have a weeknight where they take one of their white staff shirts and we have a tie-dye night, and they can tie-dye their shirt amongst everybody. We got 100 people doing that. And then we have tie-dye Thursday. They wear their tie-dyes on that Thursday. So that's my tip. So Sam, you're up with the mafia.
All right. So I was trying to think of socially distant games, and the kids, everyone else seems to know this game. I just learned it 3 weeks ago from the kids and didn't even know the real name of it until just recently. But the nice thing about this game is it's a little bit like Heads Up, 7-Up. You could either do it that way with just tapping with a pool noodle, the person who's going to be the doctor, while they have their heads down, the person who's going to be the killer, and the person who's going to be the policeman. Or you can do it with a deck of cards, and the card, you'll tell them what card they pull, you know, that designates them in those positions. So then the person who's a narrator will talk to the killer and ask who they want to kill. She'll talk separately to the policeman, who does he want to arrest? And they'll talk to the doctor about who do you want to save. And then when she finds out all those answers, then everyone puts their heads up and she tells the story of what just happened. Now, if the policeman arrests the killer, gets the right killer, they win. If the doctor saves the right victim, they win. You know, so it's pretty elaborate storytelling is the main part of the game.
Very nice.
I'm afraid of the game. No, it sounds super fun though.
Kids love that game. They asked for that game.
The wrong person, there'd be a whole narrative about how I picked on someone wrong or something. But no, that sounds super funny. I'm gonna play with my friends. So my tip of the day is about, I guess, more directed at camp leaders or directors, to just say, perhaps start your summer or your I guess pre-summer recruiting with a survey that asks your staff, you know, what victory and success looks like for them at the end of the summer, so that they are putting themselves in a position of being forward thinking, like we've been talking about. And really the rationale behind it is just so that they have a voice, and so that as you are planning, you know, what your summer looks like, and anticipating that, or knowing that without a good staff culture, the camp culture is going to go downhill. that we are being able to use their own answers to help craft what the camp experience will look like. And so whatever those questions are that are most relevant for your camp, but for me, it is definitely, what do you want? What does success or victory look like for you at the end of the summer? What does it not look like for you? Because I think that's just as important. And then just whatever questions that or maybe they're even frequently asked questions that you have throughout past summer experiences, or obstacles that you can foresee coming, and just bake those in as part of some sort of survey so that you have the voice of your most valuable assets, which is your staff.
Yeah, and one thing I suggest about that, when you get the answers to that kind of survey, to when the supervisors check in with them throughout the summer, like mid-season or final evaluation kind of things, to bring it up and find out if their goals are being met.
Absolutely.
All right, Kim, you're up.
So I've been thinking a lot about, and we talked about how camp directors are so getting, in the weeds about like what the details of things are going to look like. And sometimes I think we underestimate the creativity and innovation that our younger people can do and their capabilities. But I think some things that we can be doing to sort of foster that in these months leading up to camp so if we're doing different Zoom meetings or having different conversations with them, is giving them opportunities to really think outside. I hate the expression think outside the box. I know a good camp friend of mine, she says there is no box. You don't even have to have a box, right? Anyway, so I started thinking about when I was first teaching and I went to a staff development day. And so Sam, this was my Kimspiration from yesterday's Instagram. And so I was remembering that the speaker put a big circle filled in, a drawing and said, okay, what is this? And, we were supposed to answer, and many people said, it's a dot, it's a spot, it's a circle that's been filled in. And the speaker said, well, that's pretty typical for adults, who are going to give those kind of answers. But what the cool thing is he said, if you ask that same question, you put that same drawing up in front of 5-year-olds or, 3rd graders and ask them, what is this? You're going to get, it's Snoopy's nose. It's the top of a telephone pole. It's a clock without numbers. And so how can we get our staff to look at things that maybe we always look at, and how can we look at them differently? So I put a game in the show notes called Disruptus, and it's about taking two different things and trying to find a marriage between them where you are creating something new, or you're transforming, or you're coming up with a new use for that. And so if you think back to Orville and Wilbur Wright, an airplane is just a bird and a bicycle coming together. I mean, I'm sure there's a lot more than that, right? There's physics and all that involved, but they're taking two things and kind of figuring out how to innovate with them. So give your staff some challenges and empower them to come up with what your program and what some of those activities are going to look like that's different this summer.
Thanks, Kim. And like she said, we're going to have that link in the show notes along with the link for Project Real Job and a bunch of other things. You have that podcast you were talking about? Is that what that link is there?
Yep.
Awesome. And what's this staff culture thing that you put?
So Jolley and I wrote 2 blogs for ACA just recently for Project Real Job, and it's some of the things that we talked about today are in there and more. So
your values in action during uncertain times. All right. Well, that'll be in the show notes. All right, Jolley, bring it home.
Okay, so a pool noodle, which is a very campy thing. We've already talked. I loved it. That Sam, you brought it up in your tip thing for the mafia. I was like, yes. And so, this summer, kids are, going to have their mask. They'll have their water bottle, whatever, their normal. And I think every kid and staff should have their own pool noodle, if that's possible. And there's already things we already know, and there's tons of camp books, right? 50 ways to use your noodle. There's all those already there, but I think there's so many other things we can be doing with that. One, it helps kids and staff remember. So Tiffany doesn't have to yell, we're all going to die when you're close. You just like, is that a pool noodle away? Are you a pool noodle away at least, or 2, we can use that. But I also think it's a really great way for that as as Andy was talking about, staff bonding as well. So if you had lots of different colors, it could be a really good way, because some of the things that we normally do, the Jim Kane kind of touchy feel, things we're not going to be able to do, but you could put like all the orange noodles people over here, all the yellow noodles over here, all the green. And I think during staff training, if you have your staff with those noodles, they can start to think about, how could we use this? Like, what can we can make lines out of it. We can do all sorts of things, conduct music. It's just such a great tool. And it's stuff that most of us have around camp, pool noodles, or even if you only had half of one. But I think that that's my tip, is like, let's just have that be part of the mask and the water bottle and the pool noodle.
Add it to the packing list.
Yep.
Or the things you need to bring to camp.
So remember, Jolley, this is a day camp pod. So now, like, I'm envisioning all these kids getting on the camp bus with their pool noodles.
Yes.
Right. And it's gonna be like jousting on the bus now.
Jousting's the best thing to do with pool noodles. Like, that is the most fun. I started a camp for girls with middle school girls, and I did not even realize that pool noodle would be that. We just had them for other things. Jousting became one of the best activities, and it wasn't our idea to do jousting, that was theirs. But that's what I love about pool noodles. They're just like, you could do all sorts of things with them.
Yeah.
You can
You know what I love about-
play with them. You put whipped cream on the end of it and sword play. And if the person gets whipped cream on them, you stabbed them. You got them.
You got them.
There's no denying it.
Oh, Andy's just loving all these ideas. all the sticky pool noodles now going back.
Maybe you have a container for your
Yes,
noodles.
we would have to come up.
Maybe.
We would have to buy a pool noodle shed for each division.
One of those tents that got blown away by the tropical storm.
Yeah. Listen, my favorite thing about pool noodles is you can buy them at the dollar store.
Yep.
All right. So, of course, those are the cheap pool noodles that break easily, but what are you going to do? Well, thank you, Kim and Jolley. I appreciate you guys coming on. And thank you, Sam and Tiff. Awesome as always. The Day Camp Podcast is brought to you, all right, by the Go Camp Pro team, AM Skyer, and Commercial Recreation Specialists. Thanks for helping us bring this to you. If you like what you hear, you should subscribe to the Day Camp Pod on your favorite podcast platform. Check out the show notes from this and other episodes at daycamppodcast.com, as well as contact info for the show, our guests, and our wonderful co-hosts. Thanks for listening and making yourself a better day camp professional. We'll be back next week with a mini pod, and in 2 weeks with another full episode of the Day Camp Podcast. Woo!
Tiff, when you were talking about starting up camps, my